It was supposed to be a polished, polite conversation. A rare televised forum titled, Power Principle, Voices of Justice and Media, hosted by the National Dialogue Network. Cameras were rolling. Millions tuned in across the country. On one side of the glossy stage, Chief Justice John Roberts, pressed suit, thin smile, representing the face of American law. On the other, Oprah Winfrey, poised, commanding, chosen to speak on the intersection of public discourse and power. The first half of the show moved smoothly, discussions on freedom of speech, judicial overreach, media accountability. But then, at minute 42, everything changed. Oprah, with her voice even and calm, raised a question: do you believe the court should be above transparency, even when the public's trust is eroding? Roberts blinked hard. He tightened his jaw. "Excuse me," he said, the microphone catching the heat in his tone. "Are you implying this court, my court, is acting in secrecy? That we owe our decisions to the whims of the public?" Oprah didn't flinch. She merely crossed her legs and tilted her head. "I'm asking whether silence from the bench still serves the people." And then, in front of millions, Chief Justice Roberts exploded. "You don't lecture me about service, Ms. Winfrey. You run a talk show. I run a court that upholds the Constitution." The audience gasped. Producers froze. But Oprah never broke eye contact. Her reply would become the most replayed clip of the year. The studio fell into a strange, heavy silence. No one moved. The cameras kept rolling, but the air had shifted, tense, electric. Oprah sat there, composed as ever. She took a beat. Then another. Not to gather her thoughts, but to give Roberts's outburst room to echo. Finally, she leaned forward ever so slightly and said in a voice calm enough to chill the room, "You seem very threatened by a question, Chief Justice. That says more about the state of the court than I ever could." The audience murmured. Even the moderators looked stunned. Roberts stared back, red-faced, lips parted as if searching for a comeback, but finding none. Oprah continued, this time addressing the audience directly. "When asking about public trust provokes this kind of fury from the highest judicial officer in the land, it makes you wonder, what exactly are they trying to protect?" Her voice never rose. It didn't have to. Every word was scalpel sharp. Roberts finally cut in, voice hoarse with indignation, "You're playing to your base. You want headlines. I uphold law, not popularity." Oprah blinked slowly. "Then why are you shouting, Judge?" Another gasp from the audience. Twitter lit up instantly. Hashtags like #RobertsMeltdown and #OprahOwnsRoberts began trending within minutes. But Oprah wasn't done. She turned back to the moderators and, with poised grace, said, "I'm happy to continue this discussion, if my fellow guest can regain his composure." The moderators stammered, unsure whether to move on or call for a break. But the nation had already decided, Oprah had won the night, and something fundamental had shifted. The production team scrambled during the commercial break. In hushed voices behind the curtain, a producer whispered into a headset, "We've got a situation. Stay live. Do not cut the feed." Back on stage, the tension remained thick. Roberts sat stiffly, visibly rattled. Oprah, serene as ever, gently sipped from her water glass as if nothing had happened. The moderators attempted to shift topics, judicial ethics, digital media regulation, but the spark had already ignited a wildfire. Just 20 minutes after the exchange, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. TikToks, tweets, even breaking news banners on major networks. One CNN cheerin read, "Chief Justice Roberts loses control on air, Oprah's comeback goes viral." Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, aides to several senators reportedly began circulating the video among staffers. One anonymous source texted, "He just showed the world he's more emotional than impartial." Roberts, attempting to recover, launched into a passionate defense of the judiciary's independence. "We are not elected to entertain. We are not here to be liked. We're here to interpret the law, and that requires strength, not softness. Oprah didn't interrupt. She simply waited for him to finish, then said, "Strength without accountability becomes tyranny. And the people know the difference." That line would be replayed on every major news outlet before the hour was over. By the end of the broadcast, Judge Roberts looked drained. Oprah, in contrast, had barely raised her voice, but had dominated the moment with restraint and dignity. Outside, cameras waited. Protesters had already begun gathering outside the studio. Some held signs, "Where's the transparency, Judge?" Oprah spoke. America listened. What no one yet realized was just how deep this moment would ripple, across the court, across the media, and into the very foundation of public trust. By the next morning, the confrontation had eclipsed every major headline. Fox News blasted, "Roberts under fire after on-air outburst, did Oprah cross a line?" MSNBC countered, "Oprah's composed demolition of Judge Roberts goes global." Inside the Supreme Court, the atmosphere was somber. According to a source close to the bench, at least 2 justices expressed quiet concern. One allegedly remarked, "We can't afford this kind of spotlight. Not now." Meanwhile, Oprah remained silent. No press release. No follow-up. Just silence. That made it worse for Roberts. Every pundit, every legal scholar, every op-ed writer filled in the blanks, and most weren't kind. Clips of her calm, "Then why are you shouting, Judge?" response played on loop. It was studied like a masterclass in composure under pressure. Meanwhile, a letter leaked. A bipartisan group of House representatives had reportedly drafted a formal request for Roberts to issue a public statement clarifying his conduct. The wording was unusually sharp for a communication aimed at the Chief Justice. At a time when institutional trust is deteriorating, emotional outbursts from the highest levels of the judiciary do not serve the public. The irony? Oprah hadn't even attacked him. She asked a question. He erupted. And now, the pressure wasn't just on him, it was on the entire court. Whispers began in legal circles about whether Roberts's temperament could influence certain upcoming rulings, especially cases where public interest was high. A constitutional law professor told The Atlantic, "This wasn't just a TV moment. This was a crack in the illusion that the court is immune to the pressures of public scrutiny." Roberts had once said, "Judges are like umpires, they don't make the rules, they apply them." But now, America was beginning to wonder whether their umpire just threw the ball into the crowd. For 48 hours, Oprah said nothing. No interviews. No posts. No appearances. Speculation only grew. Every late-night host, political commentator, and armchair analyst debated her next move. Would she respond? Would she escalate? Then, on the third night, she appeared unexpectedly, not on a network, not in a studio, but during a virtual town hall streamed by the National Civic Foundation, a nonpartisan nonprofit. No theatrics. Just a plain background, minimal lighting, and Oprah in a navy blue blouse. Midway through the discussion, the host gently brought up the incident. "There's something we have to ask, Oprah. Your exchange with Chief Justice Roberts has taken on a life of its own. Is there anything you'd like to say to the millions of Americans watching that moment on repeat?" Oprah nodded. She looked directly into the camera. "I didn't go there to fight. I didn't go there to humiliate anyone. I went there to ask questions the public deserves to ask, and hear answered." It wasn't the volume of his voice that shocked people. It was what it revealed, the fear that asking for accountability is somehow an attack. She paused. Her tone dropped to a whisper, yet somehow it felt louder than any shout. If the highest court in the land can't tolerate inquiry, then what are we teaching the people who depend on it for justice? That clip, just those 3 sentences, was shared over 80 million times within 24 hours. Hashtags shifted from mocking Roberts to something deeper, Hashtag demand dignity. Hashtag justice needs answers. Hashtag ask anyway. Students at Georgetown Law staged a silent sit-in. Hundreds wore shirts that read simply, "Then why are you shouting, Judge?" And in the heart of D.C., a mural appeared overnight, Oprah seated, head slightly tilted, eyes unflinching. Beside her, a cracked gavel. The message wasn't angry. It was piercing. The ground was shifting. And Roberts wasn't just in the hot seat anymore, he was under a microscope. Inside the Supreme Court, the atmosphere had grown tense. Security was quietly tightened. Media requests flooded the Public Information Office. Staffers were instructed to avoid commenting, even off the record. But the silence spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, Roberts was reportedly furious, not just at Oprah, but at the fallout. According to a source familiar with the internal atmosphere, he had snapped at a clerk, "I won't be reduced to a meme. This court doesn't answer to Twitter." But it wasn't just Twitter anymore. By midweek, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal all ran front-page op-eds, some sympathetic, most not. One headline read, "When composure is power, Oprah showed what leadership looks like." Meanwhile, Congress took notice. Senator Reid, independent Maine, introduced a bill calling for mandatory annual public ethics hearings for all Supreme Court justices. It wasn't expected to pass, but it was expected to start something. A constitutional crisis? Not yet. A public reckoning? Already underway. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Oprah was spotted visiting a youth center. She didn't mention Roberts once. But cameras still followed. Every nod, every quote, every sidestep became news. And then, late Thursday evening, another bombshell dropped. A leak. According to documents obtained by an investigative team, Roberts had personally intervened to delay an internal Supreme Court review of ethics disclosures just a month before the broadcast. The timing, and the motive, suddenly became clearer. The public backlash turned sharper. This wasn't just about yelling on TV anymore. This was about trust. Credibility. Power. And Oprah? She hadn't needed to raise her voice. The truth did it for her. The leaked documents hit the airwaves like a lightning strike. Anchors across all networks interrupted regular programming. We now have evidence suggesting Chief Justice John Roberts halted an internal ethics review tied to undisclosed financial disclosures from multiple justices. Overnight, trust in the Supreme Court, already shaken, began to crumble in real time. Public opinion polls conducted within 24 hours revealed a stunning shift. 72% of respondents believed Roberts should publicly address the leak. 58% supported congressional oversight of judicial ethics. And the most telling, 84% had seen or heard Oprah's quote about strength without accountability. Roberts's chambers released a brief statement: "The Chief Justice stands by the integrity of the court and its internal processes." But it was far too late. On The View, Whoopi Goldberg read Oprah's original response aloud and said, "You don't recover from this by hiding. You recover by explaining, or stepping aside." Meanwhile, student protests spread beyond law schools, now appearing at campuses in Michigan, Texas, California. And then came the Sunday talk shows. Former clerks, retired judges, even former Attorney General Eric Holder appeared across programs, delicately, but firmly, criticizing the Chief Justice's conduct. What's alarming, Holder said on Meet the Press, is not just the outburst, but what it exposed. "We saw ego, not principle. Reaction, not reason. And the country noticed." And still, Oprah remained largely silent. No interviews. No grand tour. She didn't have to speak. Clips of her composed expression during the outburst were more powerful than any campaign ad. Editorials referred to it as the stare that dismantled the illusion. By the end of the week, the question wasn't whether Roberts had lost control. It was whether he had lost the nation. Sunday night. 11:37 p.m. Inside his Georgetown residence, Chief Justice John Roberts sat alone in his study, eyes fixed on the paused frame of Oprah's now iconic reply. Her calm face stared back at him from the television screen. Frozen. Still. Powerful. The volume was off. But he didn't need sound. He knew every word. Stacks of printouts lined his desk, headlines, polls, legal editorials. Even conservative outlets weren't shielding him anymore. One op-ed in the National Review read, "A justice must have judgment," and this one didn't. There was a soft knock on his study door. His wife, Jane, poked her head in gently. "They're asking again if you'll issue a statement." He didn't answer. In the last week, 3 justices had privately urged him to temper the damage. One offered to help draft a public letter. Another suggested stepping back from public appearances for a while. A third simply said, "This isn't about pride. It's about trust." He had ignored them all. Until now. He slowly reached for his pen and pulled out a yellow legal pad. After a long breath, he began writing. Not defensively. Not righteously. Just honestly. "I regret the tone and tenor of my remarks. It was a moment that did not reflect the office I hold. Ms. Winfrey asked questions the public has a right to pose." He stared at the page, uncertain if he would ever release it. Across the country, the nation had already moved into a new chapter. Legal blogs now carried headlines like, "The Oprah Standard, Composure in the Face of Power, Silence Can Be Louder Than a Gavel," and in high school civics classrooms from Atlanta to Seattle, teachers were playing the broadcast. Not for its chaos, but for its clarity. Monday morning arrived like a tide, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. In Washington, newspapers hit the stands with a unified tone not seen in years. From the Washington Post to the Chicago Tribune, the editorial pages all pointed to one moment as the tipping point: Oprah's simple, devastating question, "Then why are you shouting, Judge?" Across the nation, civic groups, law professors, and even retired judges began holding what they called people's forums. Open town halls where ordinary citizens could ask the questions the Chief Justice couldn't answer. In Detroit, a grandmother named June Palmer stood up and asked a panel, "If our judges can't listen without yelling, how can they judge without bias?" Her words went viral. Again. Meanwhile, a movement was growing. Peaceful. Powerful. Unmistakably sparked by that one broadcast. The hashtag balance the bench became a rallying cry for judicial reform. On Capitol Hill, the Judiciary Oversight Committee called for a bipartisan hearing on the ethical conduct and temperament of federal judges, something that hadn't happened in over 4 decades. Oprah, still avoiding major interviews, quietly released a single statement on her foundation's website: "Our democracy thrives when we ask hard questions, and listen without fear." I'm grateful to the millions who understood what that moment really meant. The message was short. But every major outlet printed it in full. Even late-night comics, usually quick to turn moments like this into punchlines, backed off. Trevor Noah said on The Daily Show, "When Oprah teaches a masterclass on accountability using nothing but posture and patience, that's not a joke, that's history." And behind the curtains of power, some in the judiciary whispered what few dared to say aloud just yet: "If this doesn't shake the marble, what will?" That Thursday, the Supreme Court released its schedule for the upcoming public statement session. Normally routine. This time, one name stood alone at the top. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., special address. It was unprecedented. A sitting Chief Justice voluntarily addressing the public after a personal controversy. The media lost its collective breath. The Capitol buzzed. Every network prepared live coverage. Even schools announced they would stream the remarks in government and civics classes. That morning, Oprah was seen leaving her Montecito home. No entourage. No cameras invited. Just a short, handwritten note passed to a reporter waiting by the gates: "Today isn't about me. It's about whether truth still has a seat in the courtroom." At 11 a.m. sharp, Roberts stepped to the podium inside the chamber's press hall. No robes. Just a dark navy suit and a folded paper in his hands. He looked visibly smaller, not physically, but publicly. The weight of scrutiny had clearly done its work. He began quietly, 1 week ago, I failed to uphold not the law, but the dignity expected of this office. I was asked a fair question and met it with defensiveness, not reflection. That was wrong. Gasps across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ms. Winfrey challenged us not as entertainers or politicians, but as citizens. Her restraint, her poise, her grace under pressure reminded me of the very thing I had forgotten in that moment, that justice begins with listening. It was the first time in modern history that a Chief Justice publicly praised a media figure for holding power accountable. He paused. Looked up. This court must not fear questions. It must welcome them, because silence and opacity breed suspicion, not respect. For that, I apologize. And I will do better. Thunderous applause was not permitted. But the silence afterward carried more weight than clapping ever could. That evening, Oprah posted just one sentence on her Instagram, apology accepted, now let's keep asking. The ripple effects of Roberts' public apology were immediate, and stunning. Within 72 hours, the Senate Judiciary Committee announced a bipartisan initiative titled, The Transparency Accord, a legislative proposal designed to introduce routine disclosure requirements, independent oversight for ethics concerns, and mandatory public-facing forums for Supreme Court justices annually. Some called it theater. Others called it overdue. But most agreed, the public was now awake, and watching. Roberts, for his part, declined all interview requests. But his behavior changed. He quietly withdrew from 2 public appearances. And in internal court meetings, sources confirmed he was more reserved, more measured. Meanwhile, Oprah returned to her usual rhythm. She resumed her philanthropic visits, hosted a virtual discussion with students at Howard Law School, and donated $2 million to support civic education programs. During a panel at the Kennedy Center, a moderator jokingly asked, "Did you plan to shake up the judiciary this year?" Oprah smiled gently. "No," she said. "I just plan to ask one question and listen carefully to the answer." The audience laughed. But they knew, everyone knew, it wasn't a joke. Her moment on that stage wasn't planned. It was a product of decades of preparation, of knowing when to speak, and when silence was stronger than sound. And something deeper happened too. Young people, especially those long disillusioned with the judicial system, saw what one voice could do. Law school applications spiked. So did youth engagement in civic forums and debate leagues. A high school student in Baltimore went viral for saying, "I used to think justice was untouchable. Then Oprah reminded me, it's just a person in a chair. And we get to ask why they're shouting." Justice, it seemed, had been redefined not with a gavel, but with a gaze. Months passed, but the moment didn't fade. It crystallized. Universities across the country added the Roberts-Oprah exchange to their civics and constitutional law curricula. Professors called it a case study in democratic tension. One scholar summarized it best: it wasn't just a clash between a judge and a journalist. It was a confrontation between insulation and inquiry, and inquiry won. The Supreme Court, once considered an aloof, marble fortress, now faced renewed pressure to meet the public where it was. More accessible. More accountable. More human. Roberts, to his credit, began attending judicial town halls, voluntarily. He spoke less, listened more. He never once mentioned Oprah by name again, but no one missed the impact she had on him. And Oprah? She didn't run for office. She didn't launch a political crusade. Instead, she hosted a special televised forum titled The Power of the Question, where she sat with civil rights leaders, youth organizers, and even retired judges. They didn't debate. They reflected. The program closed with her signature calm, but resolute tone, power doesn't crumble from a question. It crumbles from pretending no question deserves an answer. It was broadcast live in 36 countries. And in the crowd, in the third row, sat a man in a dark suit. Quiet. Thoughtful. Listening. Chief Justice John Roberts. History wouldn't record their feud, it would record their mirror. One moment. One outburst. One question. And from it, a shift, not just in tone, but in truth.